All right, well, I might kick off. So welcome everyone to the first New South Wales Dairy Breakfast, hosted by the New South Wales DPI Dairy team. Look, I guess first of all, my name is Zita Ritchie. I'm a Dairy Development Officer based at Wollongbar on the North Coast. And thanks very much for joining today, and I'll be facilitating. So before I start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So for today, we've got an hour for the session and we'll keep things to time. I guess before we start, the purpose of these sessions really are to provide relevant and timely information at critical points throughout the year to help increase our industry knowledge and awareness of certain issues or tools or topics that are coming through. The sessions are aimed at service providers, but obviously everyone's welcome to join, and thanks very much for those that are participating today. And we will record the session after the event. So for those that have missed it, we can pass on that link afterwards. So that's no problem at all. So today, look, the focus is farm business management. And today we're joined by Sheena Carter, my colleague based in Scone. And Sheena is a development officer specialising in farm business management. And then after Sheena, we've got Helen Quinn from Dairy Australia, who will talk very briefly about the farm business snapshot tool, and she's the lead in farm business data. Okay, well, before we get started, I might just run a quick poll just to get everyone kind of on their game at first thing in the morning. So hopefully you can see a little poll on the screen, just so we can get an idea of who's in the room. Are you a banker, accountant, government dairy industry rep, consultant, milk factory processor member, or farm worker, or other? If you can just click on those answers, yep, I can see responses happening now, so that's a good sign, everyone can see it. And then there's a second question there too. How much do you know about the Dairy Farm Monitor project? Not much, some, or a lot? So if you're on your computer, if you can answer, but if you're on your phone or somewhere else, no problem at all. It's just a quick poll just to start things going for this morning. So we've got about 80% of people voted. We'll give a couple more seconds for those. Oh, yeah, 21. All right, so I might shut it off there for those that haven't done it. Sorry you've missed out. End polling, share results. So we've got about 30% of everyone today is from government or industry rep, from the dairy industry rep. We've got a few consultants on the line too, and a couple of bankers, accountants and milk factory staff, a few others as well. Sorry, I haven't captured your title there. And then a good background for Sheena and I, how much do you know about the Dairy Farm Monitor project? So there's some that about 24% don't know much. So there's about half of the participants today know some about Dairy Farm Monitor, and about 29% know a lot. So we've got a bit of a spread there, which is good. So hopefully Sheena can keep that in mind as we're going through. So for those that don't know much about it, there will be a bit of an intro to give a bit more background there. Okay, so I'll stop sharing those results. And I will hand that over to Sheena to start today about the Dairy Farm Monitor project. Thanks, Sheena.
Thanks, Zita. It's great to be kicking off our first session, and thanks to Zita for all the hard work you've done behind the scenes in getting us to this point. Welcome, everyone. What I'm going to do, and our poll sort of indicates that I'm probably on the right track, I'm going to give a bit of a background about Dairy Farm Monitor, why it exists, where it's come from, and then I'm going to present the 1920 results, which are obviously over a year old now, but just a summary of them. So if you'd like further information and some more detail, there is a recording of a webinar that I presented at the end of last year on the results, and there's also the annual report that you can dive into to have a look yourselves and get more information, and we can have questions as well. So what is it? Look, it's a national project that's run across all the dairying regions in Australia. There's over 250 farms nationwide that are involved. In New South Wales last year, we had 35 farms. So the idea is that it's a comprehensive physical and financial analysis of farm performance in the region. And it's used by government, by Dairy Australia and other organisations to really help them in prioritising strategy and sort of decision making within their organisations. It's also the high quality data that sits behind DairyBase, which is an online business analysis tool that farmers and consultants can use, that's provided by Dairy Australia. It's a free service, but if people are wanting to compare against industry results. This is the high quality data that sits behind that. And it really gives us a picture of how farmers are responding in their business to the external forces that they're subject to throughout the year. It also gives us some trends in the industry that we can see over time. And it shows the regional diversity, both across the nation, but also within New South Wales that we see in our industry. Who's involved? Well, look, it would not happen without the generous time and contribution and information that the dairy farmers provide us. They are very generous in doing this. They open their books up to us. We have a team of data collectors in New South Wales. Some of them are consultants, some of them are DPI staff, some of them are local land services staff that have been involved in the dairy industry for a long time. So everyone's got good dairy understanding and knowledge. It's a partnership within New South Wales between New South Wales DPI and Dairy Australia. We jointly fund the rollout of Farm Monitor, but we've also got the strong support of our regional development programs in New South Wales, of which we've got 3, Dairy New South Wales, Subtropical Dairy and Murray Dairy. And they really help us getting the information out. We run workshops at the end of the year around the state. The value to them and to us is that it enables us to have that business culture sort of focus when we're talking to farmers and trying to, you know, broaden the conversation and the understanding that we all have of the industry. The outputs, so each year we produce an annual report, which is available, limited hard copies are available. It also sits on the Dairy Australia and our website in an electronic form. The participating farmers get an individual farm report, which is the huge value to them. You know, it's a business health checkup each year, and the longer they're in the program, obviously they get more and more historical data that's then, you know, they can look at some changes that have happened in the business over time or things that have influenced the business results that they see. We do the face-to-face webinars. Generally, we try, face-to-face presentations. Generally, we try to do them on farm. Last year, they were at venues, indoor venues for various reasons. And as I've mentioned, we've got a recording of the webinar on our DPI YouTube page. This year, we're going to try and do some earlier release of results through a preliminary report. Because a lot of pulling together the annual report, there's a bit of delay with the toing and froing and getting it right before it's released. So we'll try and do a preliminary report to get results out to industry a bit quicker. And we're also currently developing an online tool with the skills of one of my colleagues, Juan Gargiulio. So you'll be able to see a summary of the results for the year for the state, for North and South, and individual farms. And it is just a high level summary, but that will be fantastic when that's released. Now, before we start to step into Farm Monitor results itself, I just do want to caution that it's a summary of the results of the participating farms. So for last year, 35 farms in New South Wales. It's not the whole New South Wales industry. The farms we try to have them representative of the industry, but it is the summary of the results of those farms. Often we get movement of farms in and out of the project over time. So you've got to be careful when you're comparing results between the years. It's not a longitudinal study. There is movement, although this year it seems that no one has opted out, which is fantastic. And context. They're not just numbers on a page. We really do have to context the numbers. Ultimately, these are businesses being run by people, and it's the people that drive the outcome on their own farm. They've all got their own goals and aspirations, their own unique set of resources that they're trying to manage and conditions. So we must context that as well. I'm just going to quickly step through the methodology that's used so that we're all on the same page and understand what the terminology is and how these figures are derived. Firstly, we start with our gross farm income, which is obviously predominantly our milk income. We also look at livestock trading profit and any other farm income, such as hay sales. From that, we take away our variable costs, and in the dairy game, it's herd, shed, and feed costs, and we also make an adjustment for feed and water inventory change across the year. That gives us our gross margin, and from that, we take away our overhead costs. So repairs and maintenance, insurance, rates, paid labour, etc. And then we also factor in non-cash costs, those being depreciation and imputed labour, so that sort of non-salaried family labour on farm. And that gives us our EBIT, our earnings before interest and tax, or commonly referred to as operating profit. Once we've got our EBIT, in Farm Monitor, we look at return on total assets managed. So we look at assets owned and assets leased. So it's our EBIT divided by the return on all assets to get our return on total assets managed. Obviously, if we take away our interest and lease costs, we then have our net farm income, and net farm income divided by our equity will give us our return on equity. This is illustrated in the annual report in a summary for New South Wales of a profit map, which shows that flow of information in and out of the business and how those terms are derived. So for the 19-20 year, we had 35 farms. This just gives us an illustration of, loosely where the farms are located. And obviously it's heavily weighted towards the coastal strip. That's where the bulk of dairying is in New South Wales. But we do have representation of farms in the central region. And you can see we split them into north and south. This is because of various system differences, farm size, climate, etc. So south farms, and then green is our north farms. If we look at the context for the 19-20 year, it may seem like a dim, distant memory to some of us, but I hope not, because it was an incredibly challenging year. It was, for many, the third consecutive year of drought, and there was very little pasture available, very little water available. And this all obviously had an impact on feed prices that people had to pay, and it was, fodder shortages, widespread fodder shortages. So it was very difficult conditions. That is a farm on the mid-coast region of New South Wales, and the haze is actually smoke from bushfires. So we also had things like bushfires thrown into the works, as well as COVID. Fortunately, when we got towards autumn, we did see a turnaround, and we saw widespread rain events, which meant that we did have some greenness return. This is obviously 12 months later, but by the end of the financial year, particularly for northern New South Wales, conditions had started to improve at long last. This is just a summary of the rainfall across the farms in the data set, and we can see, basically flatlining of rainfall events in the first half of the year. But the thing to remember is that sort of really extends way back here. There was not very much effective rainfall for a very long period of time. Then we got to autumn and saw this spike in rain, particularly for the north, which meant that, we had grass growing in paddocks again, and we could directly graze feed. In the north, it meant that people were able to conserve a bit of fodder and put silage and hay in sheds as well. But being that autumn period, it meant that most people could continue with their normal autumn sowing plans, which was a great relief. Not so much down in the south of New South Wales, particularly for that far south coast region around Bega Badalla area. They were a bit behind in getting their rainfall events. If we look at a summary of the physical characteristics of the farms in the data sets, our average milk solids per cow in the state is 412. Our homegrown feed consumed, which is about calculation, but the percent of energy coming from homegrown feed was only 51%, which is the lowest in the 9 years of Farm Monitor for New South Wales. We tend to sit around, on average, and obviously each system is different, but on average it's around 60% of homegrown feed in the diet. And then if we look at labour efficiency, averaging around 76 cows per full-time equivalent, or 39,000 kilos of milk solids. Now, when we look at the state north and south, we start to see this regional variation. So we can see the southern farms are producing more per cow. The homegrown feed, that year there was less homegrown feed in the south in the cow's diet than in the north. And they tend to be more labour efficient in the south than in the north also. So some of the influences we saw on the profit result, milk price. The milk price across the state was the highest milk price we've seen in the 9 years of Farm Monitor, and it was up by nearly 15% and this is the milk price for those farms in the data set. It's not a state average, which obviously is a supply and demand. It was drought, there was a shortage of milk, so milk prices increased to try and secure supply for processors. We saw some incredibly high concentrate and purchased feed prices, which hopefully we don't see again in a hurry, but obviously driven by the complete shortage of feed nationwide. And that had a huge impact on total feed costs and cost of production. Our cost of production that year was the highest it's been in a Farm Monitor period, about $8.91 per kilo milk solids. So it was, very, very tough conditions. And then if we look at that again between north and south, again, we see this regional variation. The north tends to receive a higher milk price compared to the south. Obviously, the south is closer to that southern milk pricing system, and the north much more exposed to the liquid milk market and the flat supply pricing. And differences we see in purchased feed costs as well. It tends to be more expensive in the north than in the south. So the results, I must say when I first started looking at the files as they came in, I was quite surprised, but the 38 cents per kilo milk solids was the 18-19 financial year. And the 19-20 year, we had $1.05 per kilo milk solids EBIT, which was the third equal highest EBIT we've had in the 9 years of the project. That was primarily driven, I'll take that back, primarily driven by that strong milk price. As I've said, the cost of production was the highest we've seen in the 9 years. So it was really that strong milk price that enabled that strong result. This is just a summary in dollar terms. If we're looking at our EBIT, it improved dramatically. So the light blue line is 18-19, dark blue line is 19-20. We can see our EBIT nearly $270,000 on average. Our net farm income, so our EBIT take away those interest and lease costs, got into positive territory from a negative nearly $32,000 the year before. And that EBIT translated into a 2.7 average return on total assets. If we look at this graph, which is just a summary of the results over the last 9 years, the left-hand side, we've got our return on total assets. Right-hand side is our milk price. The green lines are the north farms, the blue lines are the south farms. Dotted lines is milk price, and we can see really strong pricing there. The return on total assets, we've seen a bit of a jump, thankfully, last year. And I guess, the worrying thing was around here from 14-15, we were certainly on a trending decline in terms of return on assets. So hopefully we see a continued uptick in these results for this current financial year. This current financial year, well, we don't know what the results are going to be yet until we get them in. But if we look at some of the factors that are at play at the moment, the good, milk price. We still have strong milk prices, which is great to see. Probably still a factor of supply and demand in the system. We have had the mildest summer, which has been wonderful, but probably, we've had none of those major heat wave events throughout the year, which really, not not only do they impact people, but they certainly impact the cows. So it's also enabled good pasture growth on farms, so much more homegrown feed in the diet I am expecting to see, which will reduce our cost of production on farms that are predominantly pasture-based. The ability to sort of put away fodder as well, making hay and silage in most areas improved dramatically. And we've also seen a fall in the price of purchased feeds, our concentrates and fodder, thankfully. So these will certainly impact on our cost of production. This year, we will have increased from 35 farms to 40 farms in the data set. We're actually sitting at 41 at the moment, which is fantastic. And it'll be our 10th year of farm monitor in New South Wales. So hopefully it's a good one. The bad or the not so good? Well, look, if it's not drought or fire or COVID, there's always something. And unfortunately, our coastal farmers really copped a hammering with the floods earlier in this year, which will have major implications for many farms. I think, you know, some of our herd health impacts. Lameness and mastitis were obviously an issue, lameness particularly, which is going to have resulted in culling in many herds or early drying off, which will have an impact on milk production. We'll also have repairs and maintenance costs that will come into play with, you know, devastation on laneways that were washed out, fencing, infrastructure on farms, all that sort of stuff. So there will be effects, but I guess the proportion or the size of those effects remains to be seen on our end of year result. And I thought I'd also mention the labour challenges, particularly for our larger farms that are reliant on that backpacker labour. There's obviously with COVID been challenges around that and accessing some of that labour that they might normally have had access to. But look, fingers crossed, hopefully, and I have spoken to a couple of farms already to try and get a sense on what they feel about the year. Hopefully it is a fantastic year for our farmers relative to some of the other ones we've seen in the past. So I'll stop it there, Zita, if
Thanks, Sheena.
There are any quick questions?
Yeah, we've got one here. We've got one from Jono Forrest. So Jono was saying, I expect that some of the farmers might have received government support, so cash flow boost, bushfire grants, etc., during the year. I presume that these amounts are deducted from income. Is that right?
Yes, correct. So when we're entering that data, any of those rebates or subsidies are netted off the related costs. So if it's a subsidy on feed being brought in, that's netted off feed cost as an example. Okay. Yes.
Thanks, Sheena. Are there any other questions from anyone else? Feel free to take.
Sheena, Jonathan, Dairy New South Wales here. I was a couple of minutes late getting on, so I may have missed it. What was the sort of level of grain feeding on average per cow?
It was slightly up across the data set, and I couldn't give you the specific figure, but obviously it was up.
Do you know what it was the previous? Sorry.
Oh, look, it really sort of, again, it's context. If we're talking about an average, you know, we're around 1.5 to 2 tonnes of dry matter per cow on the farms, and obviously there's huge variation within that, but we did see an increase in that concentrate feeding. I think we still had that strong milk price. So even though the grain price was high, there was still, in some cases, a good milk price to grain price ratio. So there was opportunity there. But I can dig out the absolute figure if you'd like, Jono.
Oh, no, that's fine. It was more in terms of what the lower grain price in the current season would mean in terms of total lowering cost of production. Yeah, I was just keen to get a sense what that might mean. So just back calculating.
Yes, yeah, and obviously our milk price to grain price ratio is even more it's much more healthier this year than it was last year, but I guess, we still need to balance that with consumption of our homegrown feed, which is probably still relatively cheaper than purchased.
Yep. Cool. Thanks.
Any other questions to put forward? No. Sheena, I've just got one question. I noticed that the purchase feed costs were quite a bit different between the north and the south. What's the main reason for that? It's just high purchase feed prices?
Yeah,
look, other factors.
Predominantly it's getting that feed from the regions in which it's grown to that coastal part of the state. A lot of that feed is grown in central New South Wales, but actually in that 1920 year, a lot of it was coming from Victoria and South Australia. So it's really that, in the main, it's that freight component getting the feed to those regions.
Yeah. Okay, mainly freight. Thanks. All right. Are there any other questions now? Otherwise, we'll keep going, Sheena, and then we have time for a few more questions for Sheena at the end. I think that's all right. Okay, thanks, Sheena.
Thanks, Zita. I will now just jump into quickly the Dairy Standard Chart of Accounts. Obviously, when we're getting information from the farms, we need good quality information. And one thing in the industry that really helps is a good chart of accounts for farmers, so that we can easily pull out particularly costs in the business. But so the Dairy Standard Chart of Accounts, I'm not sure if everyone is aware that it exists, but it's a chart of accounts that has been developed by Dairy Australia and industry more recently. It actually probably really originated around the time of the introduction of GST, and Murray Dairy and Ag Victoria really started to develop this chart of accounts for industry. So it's the aim of it is to give a clear sort of dairy tailored chart of accounts, so you can clearly allocate costs that are related to dairy businesses. And it enables a lot of things, but it enables a clear categorisation of things like, so for variable costs I mentioned earlier, we've got herd costs, shed costs and feed costs. And it enables both the industry to have a clear conversation about cost in the business. What are we talking about? If we've got some definitions of what goes into these costs, it's quite clear what we're talking about, and we can use that information both in tax accounts but also in management accounts. So if we're comparing against years, we know we're really comparing like against like. And the benefits of it are that it enables the industry to have a meaningful conversation about terminology and income and expenses in the business. We actually know what we're all talking about if we've adopted this. It's the same language across the whole country. It is both tax compliant, and I'll give you a quick snapshot of a screenshot of what it looks like if you're downloading it off DA's website. It is tax compliant, so you've got the ability to upload it into your accounting software as well, probably with some support of an accountant or a bookkeeper to do that, unless you've got those skills. But in saying that, we do have support for farmers in many ways. There's the resources on the Dairy Australia website where you can actually find the chart of accounts. There's a few videos and webinars on there around uploading it into accounting software, particularly around My Alban Zero. What else have we got? Dairy Australia for a number of years now have had a fantastic workshop called Farm Business Fundamentals, which explains quite clearly the chart of accounts, and farmers go through an exercise of coding into using that chart of accounts to get them familiar with it. And within New South Wales, and I'll talk on this in a second, there's a project called Business Support Services Project that'll give farmers one-on-one support if they would like to update their chart of accounts. Obviously, updating your chart of accounts isn't something you can do at any time of the year. It's really a into the new financial year activity. depending on the business, certainly within that first quarter of the new financial year. If we just have a quick look, this illustrates that here we're talking about herd costs. So that's our main category. Then herd costs are divided down into what we're calling subcategories. So we've got AI and herd test, animal health, and calf rearing as subcategories. Then there's subcategories within those. Now, it's not meant to be a fixed tool. It's very much to be tailored to a farm's business. And it really depends on what the farmer wants to know about their business as to the level of detail they would go with this. If they're just happy to know that calf rearing costs were $10,000, that's fine. But if they want to drill down further and understand, how much calf pellets are costing, well, then perhaps go to that level of detail. But if it's not something you need to know, they don't need to go to that level of detail. So it's not a, rigid tool. There is, you can design it to suit your business and the information you need to report on in your business. This is the download from the DA website. So you can see that we've got our main categories, our subcategories, and our subcategories. It's GST compliant, and then there's a description for people to sort out what goes where within the chart of accounts as well. And that's it on the chart of accounts. So we are getting good adoption of the chart of accounts in New South Wales with farmers, and we are also getting good support from bookkeepers and accountants within the industry in adopting it as well, which is fantastic. So I'll kick on to our business support services project. This is a project that is really about trying to help farmers improve their business management skills in their own business. We've got, I mentioned the Farm Business Fundamentals workshop. There's lots of resources and workshops that are available to farmers, but at the end of the day, after you've had people in the room, unless they've actually got the skills or the support to implement some of these things on farms, often it's just knowledge that they've acquired and we don't actually see any practice change. So the Business Support Services project started last year. It's funded by New South Wales DPI, but it's being delivered and administered by the regional development programs within New South Wales. So it's for New South Wales farmers around the state. Carly Potts at Dairy New South Wales is managing that, and farmers, if they're interested, contact their regional extension officer within the state. The offerings, there's broadly two components. There's the one-on-one support, and that can be with the chart of accounts, getting that into your accounting software and adopting that. It can be for things like budgeting and planning. What other one-on-one things, Carly? You probably have to chip in and help me, but I'll show a slide in a second which will outline some of the other things that have been accessed with that one-on-one support. Dairy Base, if people want to get their information into Dairy Base, a consultant can come and sit with you and help you get that in, and also help you interpret the report that comes out of Dairy Base, what it means for your business. There is also group support for activity that's business focused. So there's a couple of dairy business network groups that exist in the state. There's been some succession planning workshops done around the state in conjunction with Rabobank, which I believe went very well. Monday, Carly, you've got a session with Carissa Wolf on, sort of managing that milk check going through to the spring period. So there are quite a few things on offer. We've also got some video testimonial done with a farmer up in northern New South Wales, up around Manila, Emma Coombs. She accessed some one-on-one support there and was absolutely thrilled with how it helped her in her business. So that's available on our Facebook page, DPI Facebook page, and Dairy New South Wales have pushed the links out there as well. So have a look at that. And if farmers are interested in getting involved, it's really talk to your regional extension officer, Carly Potts, Dairy New South Wales, or Jane or Greg or Jono, and Alicia Richters from Subtropical and Lockie Barnes from the Murray Dairy region. And I think that's, oh no, I was just going to show you, this is just a snapshot of the left-hand side, so it shows some of the services that have been accessed. And then the right-hand side shows the uptake across the state to date. So there is good engagement, and hopefully with the end of the financial year, and if people are interested in the chart of accounts and dairy base doing an annual farm report, we'll get some more engagement with farmers. So if you as a service provider are aware of farmers that might benefit from any of these offerings, please mention it to them and have the conversation, because it's not forever, but it is really invaluable having that one-on-one support with farmers sitting around the kitchen table with them. Thank you. That's it, Zita. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Sheena. Look, if anyone has any questions, feel free to take yourself off mute. I guess just quickly, Sheena, just wanted to ask, the Businesses Supports project, is that going over a set period of time, or is that an open-ended project, or just wondering how that fits with the RDPs? Is that accessible for a while, that support?
It is accessible for a while, and Carly may correct me on this, but is it till the end of next June 2022?
Yeah, we're expecting till the 31st of December next year, or until funds run out. So it is a fixed funding amount. So whichever comes first, but probably looking at just end of December next year.
Yeah. Okay, great. Good to know. Any other questions for Sheena on the Businesses Support or the Dairy Standard Charter of Accounts or Dairy Farm Monitor? No. If there's no questions,
and I guess on Dairy Farm Monitor, if you've got clients or know of farmers that might be interested in participating, again, mention it to them, or give me a call and I can get in touch with them and see if they're keen. I think there's strong industry support to grow the number of farms in Farm Monitor in New South Wales. The more farms we've got, the more accurate and relevant the information. So yeah, more farms are always welcome. We've hit our target for this financial year, but we'll still take more.
Yeah, that's great to know, Sheena, that's opportunities there. Okay, well, thanks very much. Oh yeah, Jono, did you have a question? No.
Yeah, I was just going to see whether there was anyone celebrating a 10-year milestone. You mentioned the program had been running for 10 years. Is there anyone who's participated for 10 years straight?
Yes, we do have a couple of farms, or a few farms actually, that have been in it. Yeah, we should give them a prize, Jono.
Absolutely. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
No, it's great to get that data set over such a long period of time.
All right. And I think interest is certainly growing with farmers. This year I've actually had farmers call me to be involved in it, which is a great sign.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks very much, Sheena. If there's anything else, otherwise feel free to write in the chat too if something springs to mind in a little bit too. But thanks, Sheena, very much. I might get you to stop sharing your screen. And I know that Helen's in the room there somewhere. So Helen, there we go. Take yourself off mute.
Thanks, Zita. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
And can you see the screen?
Yes, I can see the screen. Thanks very much, Helen. So Helen's going to speak to us today about the Farm Business Snapshot, and for about 5 minutes or so. If there's any questions, yeah, feel free to ask Helen at the end. But thanks very much, Helen. I'll pass it over to you.
Perfect. Look, thanks for the opportunity. So the Farm Business Snapshot, it's a new online tool that we've just released. So this tool aims to be a much quicker and easier way for farmers to analyse their farm business performance. So you'll see on the screen, I've got the snapshot tool. And if you look at the left-hand side, you'll see the first tab is physical data. And this is where we made the decision just to require 5 pieces of physical data. So you'll see farm area, milking cows, and litres in total production in litres or solids. So yeah, so they're the only key physical inputs that you're required to put into the tool. Then if you come down, we capture the income and costs for the farm business. And the income and costs, it's very similar to dairy base and also identical to the standard chart of accounts that Sheena's gone through. So yeah, so if you go to the effort of converting your accounting package into the standard chart of accounts, it should make filling in these input cells much easier and smoother. So yeah, so we capture income and then variable costs being your herd costs, your shed costs, your feed costs, and then work down and capture overhead costs, non-cash costs, finance costs, and straight into the report. So yeah, so we've made the decision that the reports, you can download the reports as a PDF or as an Excel. And so as a farmer, if you wanted to download a report and send it to your banker or send it to another service provider, it's relatively straightforward to do that. And for as we get more farmers and service providers on the tool, you'll see over here, you've also got the option to share the data set within the system. So yeah, so the reports, so when you come to the actual report, your data is reported in actual dollars, in dollars per kilo milk solids, per litre, per cow, and again, you know, per milking hectare and usable hectare. So, and with the reports, the feedback that we had from Dairy Base, which is our key farm business analysis tool, is that so a lot of farmers and service providers, they like graphical representation, not just numbers. And so within this tool, we've got these traffic lights. And so the traffic light, when you put your farm data in, you're being compared to the Dairy Farm Monitor benchmarks. And so if you have a green traffic light, that indicates that you're better than the top 25%. The red traffic light indicates that not as good as the average, and the orange between average and top 25%. So yeah, and so also we've embedded as many help notes and help texts as possible. So hopefully to work through the tool, it's relatively intuitive to work through and fill out the inputs and interpret the report. So you'll see, yeah, you've got the cash report there and also the profit report. So what you don't have, if you're familiar with Dairy Base, so there's not a wealth report within this tool, and also there's not a detailed physical report. So we made the decision that we wanted a tool that's a lighter or a simpler version of Dairy Base. And so the most complex part of filling out farm data, if you're in Dairy Farm Monitor or you've used Dairy Base, is that physical data. And so with this tool, we've actually eliminated as much of that as possible. Though in saying that, so for farmers that choose to use this tool and if you'd like to extend your analysis, we've connected the farm business snapshot to Dairy Base. And so every data set that's saved within this tool is automatically stored within the Dairy Base database. So down the track, if you choose to then transition to Dairy Base, your data sets will appear and you can copy them and then you can convert them into full Dairy Base data sets. Yeah, so that's a quick overview of the tool. We've on next Monday, Fiona Smith is running a 1-hour webinar just to go through all the details and features. So if you're interested in learning more about the tool, I'd encourage you to go to the Dairy Australia website, and we've got the Farm Business Snapshot sitting there on the homepage and a link through to the webinar on Monday. Or yeah, by all means, log on and have a play at the tool and let us know if you've got any feedback. So Zita, that's the quick overview. Happy to take any questions that people may have.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Helen. Are there any questions for Helen? I know I've got one, but I'll open it up to the floor first. If there's any questions. Nope, not yet. Helen, I guess I'm just...
Yeah.
Oh, no, Sheena, you go.
I've just got one. I know, Helen, within Dairybase, you've created that function where you can now do some budgeting. Is that a function within the farm snapshot, or is it more a matter of downloading the Excel sheet and doing it that way?
No, I should have left the screen up. Yes, so no, it's certainly a function within the snapshot tool as well. So you've got the option to, to enter the data and to select the financial year for this financial year. But noting when you look at the reports, you're not going to have the traffic lights because you won't have the benchmark data. So the benchmark data is that DFMP data. And so for New South Wales, when that data is completed for this financial year, we'll upload it. It'll be in Dairybase, and we'll also upload it into the snapshot. So if you do a budget and can't see the traffic lights, that's why.
Right. Thanks, Helen.
No worries.
Helen, you mentioned that the farm snapshot can go into Dairybase. Can it also go vice versa? I know Dairybase is probably the more expanded, detailed version, but if you want to just extrapolate some of the key points, do you have to re-enter it back into Snapshot if you've already done Dairybase? Like, does it talk to each other?
No, it only goes one way
One way.
Time. Yeah, so the aim is that the snapshot is the stepping tool or the stepping stone into Dairybase. So we've got it going one way. But so unless there's lots of demand, we haven't got it going back the other way yet.
Yeah, that's fine. So I guess for a farmer that's starting out and hasn't done Dairybase or Farm Monitor or wants to kind of improve some of their business side of things, would you suggest that the snapshot tool is a good place to start?
100%. So I'd suggest, as Sheena said, to go to the effort of converting your accounting software into the Dairy Standard Chart of Accounts. And then that should make filling out the farm business snapshot really straightforward. You should be able to do it in sort of under an hour.
Yeah.
It's the feedback that I get from farmers using Dairybase and also participants of Dairy Farm Monitor. It's collecting and entering that physical data, which tends to be the barrier.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Helen. Any questions for Helen? And I know Carly's just put a link to the training there on Monday. Thanks, Carly. So that's really good if anyone wants some further information.
Yeah, but I'd also say, for discussion groups, if you've got a farmer discussion group out there and they haven't been through a form of analysis before, it's an awesome spot to start. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, excellent. That's great. Well, thanks very much, Helen, for giving us that overview. Unless there's any questions for Helen, I'll move on. All right, well, here we go. We've got a question from Jono. I've also found farmers struggle with the physical data. Any tips on how to improve on this? For Sheena or Helen, you can both of you can comment on that.
Yeah, I'll let Sheena comment on the actual capturing of data, but I'll just say for Dairy Farm Monitor, like that physical data, it's so critical to have that detailed physical data. Yeah. There's some work that we've done recently at Dairy Australia around productivity. We couldn't have done it without the detailed DFMP physical data. So I know it's hard work, but I'll hand over to Sheena to provide some tips.
Particularly fodder, Jono's saying, which we know.
Yeah, I think you summarised it, Helen. It is hard work. I think with our Farm Monitor farms, we're lucky in that they're kind of used to the process now and they know the information that they need. And obviously we need to send out reminders at 30th of June, go and do your stock take. But it is quite involved, and sometimes it's a discussion pulling apart that information, trying to get the physical stuff right, and not only fodder but the livestock numbers. It's amazing when you have a conversation with people about livestock and they don't actually know definitively how many livestock they've got. So it's encouraging good record keeping, really, which is not everyone's cup of tea, but there's no simple answer. It is train them well.
All right. Well, I guess before we start wrapping up, if there's no more questions on the presentations, I mean, if anyone on the call today wants to raise any issues or anything else that they want to bring our attention to with tools around farm business management, feel free to mention it, take yourself off mute or write it in the chat. It's a good opportunity to kind of share what's going on also in this space, and as we go along for the next topics as well. So I'll just thank Helen and Sheena for both of your presentations today. It was really informative and great to find out all the different services available around business and the Dairy Farm Monitor project as well. I guess before we wrap up the session, so I guess the breakfast today, I guess, was the first one that we were trialling, and there's also other information sources out there. So we've got the Dairy Facebook page. We've also got a DPI Dairy newsletter. And some of you may have heard that there's also the Business of Dairy podcast, which Sheena has just launched, which is great. So if you're in the car or traveling or on the farm and have got a fair bit of time to spare, listen to the podcast. It's really great. Got some great business information in there. And there's also the Tocal business report. And then, as Helen's just mentioned, there's a link there, which I'll send in the webinar for this, to the Business Snapshot tool, but it's also on the Dairy Australia website. But look, thanks everyone for joining. And just before